tires of my old Subaru hummed a steady tune on the asphalt as I drove us toward the Daniel Boone National Forest. James and Brian, my usual partners in crime for these annual trips, were already deep into their usual routine. James had the music cranked, something loud and upbeat that usually got Brian singing off-key. They were both cracking jokes, leaning back against the worn seats, totally carefree. I let them have it, smiling even as I kept my eyes on the road. We'd been doing this for years, a tradition since high school, always finding some little corner of the woods to escape to. I always liked the drive out here, the way the cityscape gradually melted into rolling hills, and then, finally, dense tree lines. This time, though, there was a little something else mixed in with the usual excitement. It was a weird feeling, a small knot of worry I couldn't quite shake. Earlier in the week, I had seen a short blurb on the local news, nothing major, just a quick mention about some hikers reporting strange things in a remote part of the forest, phantom lights, weird noises, that kind of stuff. I had dismissed it, of course, figuring it was just locals talking, maybe even a prank. Brian had laughed it off immediately when I brought it up, and James, too, said it was probably just bored people looking for attention. They both thought I was being silly, which, yeah, I guess I was. Still, the idea lingered, a tiny, annoying buzz at the back of my head. It was just a news report, not a warning. That's what I told myself. We de-picked this specific spot near Cave Run Lake ages ago, maybe 5 or 6 years back. It wasn't on any obvious map, just a pull-off from a smaller access road that eventually led to a clearing, a little hidden away from the main camp areas. That was the appeal, I guess, the quiet, the feeling of being entirely alone. We liked to fish the lake, and this spot was perfect for it, offering easy access to the water in the morning. It felt private, like our own little kingdom, and we had never seen anyone else out there. That privacy was normally the best part. Traffic was light, which was a relief. I watched the mileage tick up, felt the subtle change in the air as we got deeper into the forest. The trees started to feel thicker, closer, shadows stretching longer across the road with each mile. We were cutting it a little close with the sun, but that was also part of the plan. Sunset camping was always a little more dramatic, pulling up as the last light dipped behind the hills. When I finally turned onto the dirt track that led to our spot, the music quieted down, and James leaned forward a little, looking out the window. Brian just stretched, groaning happily. The Subaru rattled and bounced over the uneven ground, but it was a familiar ride. The trees grew taller, more dense, creating a kind of natural tunnel that opened up into our clearing. We pulled up just as the sky was turning those deep, fiery shades of orange and purple. "All right, home sweet home," James said, pushing his door open. He looked around, taking a deep breath of the pine-scented air. Brian was already wrestling with his pack in the back. Finally, my butt was getting numb. I cut the engine, and the immediate silence felt almost heavy after the car's constant rumble and the music. It was that kind of deep forest quiet, where every little rustle and snap of a twig stood out. We started unloading, working quickly and efficiently. We had a system down pat by now. James always handled the tents, working with an almost military precision, snapping poles into place and staking down guy lines. Brian, on the other hand, was always on fire duty, gathering kindling and larger logs, a practiced expert at getting a blaze going with minimal effort. And I usually took care of the cooking gear and supplies, setting up the little camp stove and organizing the food. It was unspoken, always had been, just worked. We had the 2 tents up in maybe 20 minutes, side by side, facing the clearing. Brian had a small fire going in the pit we always used, the smoke already coiling up into the still air. The crackle of the flames was a welcome sound, a small pocket of warmth and light against the growing gloom of the forest. The sun was almost completely gone now, just a sliver of deep violet clinging to the horizon. As the last of the light bled out, the trees around us turned into dark, indistinct shapes, towering over our little camp. We gathered around the fire, just sitting for a bit, soaking in the quiet. It was peaceful, genuinely nice. Except the silence wasn't entirely silent. I heard a low rustling noise come from the tree line. It was faint, almost like leaves moving in a breeze, but there wasn't any wind, just a soft, drawn-out scrape, like something dragging across the ground, or maybe a small animal moving through the brush. I probably just imagined it, or it was just some woodland creature doing its thing, a deer maybe, or a fox. I didn't say anything, not wanting to break the calm. James just kept poking at the fire with a stick, his face lit by the orange glow. Brian was humming now, a low tune, looking up at the darkening sky. "We need to get our fishing gear ready for the morning," I said, mostly to myself, remembering our plan. It felt good to focus on something practical, something familiar. Fishing Cave Run Lake was the whole point of these trips, really. We always woke up at dawn, hiked down to the shore, and tried to reel in something for breakfast. We pulled our tackle boxes and fishing rods from a duffel bag and started laying out our lures and lines near the fire, getting everything organized for the morning. The air grew colder as the night really settled in, a chill that made me pull my jacket tighter. The forest was absolutely silent now, not even the faint rustling I thought I'd heard earlier. It was just us, the fire, and the immense quiet of the woods. It almost felt too quiet, if that made any sense. No crickets, no far-off owl hoots, just the fire. James looked over at us, wiping his hands on his jeans. He rubbed his arms, maybe feeling the cold too. "All right, I'm heading to bed. Long day tomorrow, right?" He gestured toward his tent. He was usually the first to call it a night, always getting up early to get a head start on the fishing. Brian nodded, already stifling a yawn. I still felt a little wired from the drive, maybe just from the coffee I'd had earlier. I watched James get up, head for his tent, and just listened to the sounds of the fire, the last sparks reaching for the sky. I woke up with a jolt around 2 in the morning. It wasn't a nightmare that pulled me out of sleep, but a sound from the woods, a faint snapping. It was just one snap, really, like a small twig breaking under something light. My eyes were wide open, looking at the dark canvas of the tent ceiling. I listened, holding my breath, There it was again. Snap, then another, and another. It wasn't random, like leaves rustling in the wind. This was too deliberate, too rhythmic, like something was stepping on twigs, one after the other, moving through the undergrowth. I slowly pressed my ear against the tent fabric, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be off to our left, deeper in the trees, maybe even behind James's tent. A low growl cut through the quiet. It was deep, guttural, and it seemed to vibrate the ground just a little. My stomach tightened. That wasn't a deer or a rabbit or anything I'd ever heard in these woods before. It sounded big and hungry, maybe. My mind raced, trying to find a normal explanation. A bear, perhaps. I'd never encountered a bear out here, but I knew they were around. Still, the growl didn't quite sound like what I'd heard on nature documentaries. This was heavier, rougher. I needed to wake James. He was a deep sleeper, but this was different. I reached out a hand, feeling around in the darkness until I found his sleeping bag. I nudged his shoulder, gently at first, then a bit harder. "James," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Hey, wake up." He groaned, a low, annoyed sound. "What? Go back to sleep, Dan." "Oh, seriously, something's out there," I said, my voice a little higher than I intended. The snapping sounds were still going, maybe a little closer now. He shifted, muttering something I couldn't quite make out, and then I heard him take a deep breath. He must have heard it then, because the annoyance in his voice vanished. He went completely still. I could feel his gaze on me, even in the darkness. "What was that?" he whispered back, his voice low and tight. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaking a little. "I woke up to it. It sounds like footsteps. And then that growl." We both listened. The cadence of the snapping twigs became clearer, more defined. It was heavy, deliberate. It moved in a wide arc, slowly pulling away from my tent, but still very much active. It sounded like something large, and it was getting closer to the edge of our camp, circling us. My breathing got shallow, my body tensing up. Brian, surprisingly, was still out cold. He was a notoriously heavy sleeper, almost impossible to rouse once he was down. We had joked about it for years, how he could sleep through an earthquake. Now, it wasn't funny anymore. "Brian," James whispered, trying to wake him from his spot next to me. "Brian, wake up." He didn't move. I heard James try again, harder. I worried about how loud we were, but I saw the logic in wanting another person awake. The idea of facing whatever was out there alone, or just with James, was a terrifying thought. Then I saw them. 2 piercing red eyes. They appeared through the gaps in the trees, about 20 yards out, maybe lower to the ground than I would have thought for something that sounded so big. They were a vivid, impossible red, glowing with an internal light. They didn't blink. They just watched us, unmoving for a second, a silent, burning presence in the absolute darkness. I felt a primal fear spread through me, cold and sharp. This wasn't some lost animal. Those weren't normal animal eyes. "Oh my God," James breathed out next to me, his voice thin with terror. The eyes vanished behind a thick bush, reappearing moments later a few yards closer, still moving in that slow, wide circle around our campsite. My imagination started working overdrive, trying to piece together what kind of creature those eyes belonged to. What kind of thing had eyes like that? And why were they so low? Was it squatting? Or was it just short? But the sounds it made, the heavy steps, suggested something massive. A branch snapped loudly, much closer this time. It crashed, thick and heavy, like someone had stomped on it. The sound made us both jump, jolting us further awake, if that was even possible. The glow of the red eyes intensified, and they were definitely closer, maybe 15 yards out now, just barely visible through the sparse trees. It felt like it was studying our tents, observing us. My skin crawled. James, acting on instinct, reached out and grabbed the thickest piece of firewood we had dragged into the tent earlier. It was a gnarled, heavy log, maybe 2 feet long. He held it like a weapon, his knuckles white. I looked at the dark outline of his arm, then back at the glowing eyes, which seemed to be moving even faster now, completing their circle. That growing sense of dread I'd had earlier, on the drive up, the one I had dismissed as just silly worry about a local news story, it came crashing back. This wasn't a phantom light. This wasn't a prank. This thing was real, and it was big. So big I couldn't understand why I was only seeing its eyes. And it was actively watching us, assessing us, circling our camp like it was trying to find an inn. It knew we were here. "Brian," I hissed, reaching over James to shake Brian's shoulder hard, trying to jostle him awake. "Brian, wake up now, asterisk." James had already started slapping Brian's leg, frantic now that the reality of the situation had sunk in. We needed him awake. We needed another person, another mind, another set of hands. The fear was a living thing in my chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think clearly. We were trapped in our tents, vulnerable. Whatever was out there had us cornered, and it felt like it was getting ready to move in. I shook Brian harder, practically rattling his teeth. My voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "Brian, wake up, please." Beside me, James was slapping Brian's leg, a frantic, rhythmic thud against the sleeping bag. The glowing red eyes continued their slow, deliberate circle outside. They were faster now, though, moving with a kind of disturbing efficiency. Every few seconds, I heard a heavy scuffing sound, like something dragging its weight through the leaves and damp earth out there. It wasn't the light twig snaps anymore. This was a deeper, heavier disturbance, a warning that whatever it was massive. Finally, Brian stirred. He groaned, a mumbled, annoyed sound that was so typical of him. His eyes blinked open, dark, and blurry in the tense gloom. He probably thought it was just us messing with him, a bad joke in the middle of the night. "What do you guys want?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "Seriously, go to bed." I didn't say anything. I just pointed, my hand shaking, toward the faint reddish glow that now seemed to be almost directly between our tents. The eyes had stopped for a second, a silent, burning gaze fixed on our little fabric refuge. There was no mistaking them, even through the thin tent material. Brian's eyes widened. He pushed himself up on his elbows, staring at the spot where the red glow pierced the darkness. The sleepiness drained from his face, replaced by a raw, immediate understanding. His jaw dropped a little. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't have to. The fear on our faces, the rigid terror in the air, told him everything. A soft, terrified gasp escaped his lips. He pressed himself back against the tent wall, trying to disappear into the fabric. The previous nonchalance he'd shown, the easy laughter about my silly worries, it all vanished in an instant. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in the small space of our tent. Then the creature let out a sound. It started as a low rumble, barely audible at first, almost a vibration more than a sound, coming from the direction of the glowing eyes. It rose quickly, climbing in pitch, raw and agonizing. It wasn't a growl this time, not a roar. It was a chilling, high-pitched wail that seemed to slice through the night, through the trees, through everything. It vibrated through the ground, through my bones, reaching some primal, buried place inside me. My teeth actually chattered together, and a cold sweat broke out over my skin. It sounded like something in immense pain, or like a sound of pure, unadulterated warning. A sound meant to shatter what little courage we had left. The wail ended as abruptly as it began, leaving an echoing silence that felt even louder than the sound itself. And in that silence, those two piercing red eyes stopped moving. They were fixed directly on our campsite, completely unblinking, unmoving for several agonizing seconds. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, each second a minute, each minute an hour. It felt like it was studying us, deliberating, planning. The sense of being hunted, of being utterly vulnerable, was overwhelming. My mouth was dry, and I couldn't swallow. James, still holding the thick piece of firewood, acted on instinct. He didn't say anything, didn't even look at us. He just moved, with a guttural sound, less a yell and more a desperate expulsion of fear. He lurched forward and hurled the heavy log he was holding. It sailed through the tent flap we'd left ajar for air, a dark blur against the invisible backdrop of the trees, flying directly toward the glowing eyes. It was a desperate attempt, a blind, panicked move to scare it off, to break the awful stillness, to do something. There was a sickening thud. The sound was distinct, solid, like the heavy wood striking something hard, something dense. It wasn't the rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig. It was a dull, heavy impact, and then a sharp cry of pain. It was almost human-like, that cry. High-pitched, a strangled sound, filled with agony. It wasn't the wail from before, but a sudden, shocked yelp, like something had genuinely been hurt. The red eyes, which had been fixed on us, immediately vanished. 1 second they were there, burning holes in the night. The next they were gone, extinguished. Then came the sound of movement. A sudden, violent rush through the undergrowth. Something large was crashing away from us, fast, tearing through bushes and snapping branches in its path. It sounded like it was in a hurry, moving with incredible speed and force, breaking everything in its way. We heard it for a few moments, the sounds getting fainter and fainter, a loud smash, a tear of leaves, a crack of a heavier branch, and then, just like that, the sounds died out completely. The silence returned. This time, it wasn't the immense, heavy quiet from before. It was a ringing quiet, filled with the echo of the wail, the thud, and the creature's cry. My ears were still ringing, my whole body vibrating from the shock. We huddled together in the tent, James still half lunging forward from where he'd thrown the wood, Brian pressed against the fabric wall, and me frozen in between them. No one moved. No one spoke. Our hearts hammered against our ribs, loud and frantic in the stillness. My breathing came in ragged gasps. The air in the tent felt thick despite the open flap, heavy with unspoken terror. We just lay there, listening, strained, waiting for any sound, any rustle, any sign that it was coming back. But there was nothing. Just the ringing silence and the frantic pounding inside my own chest. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, too terrified to move, too afraid to even whisper. The minutes crept by, agonizingly slow. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty space where the red eyes had been, half expecting them to reappear. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every gust of wind felt like a heavy step. But the forest held its breath, just like us. We waited, suspended in a state of suspended terror, just waiting for the first signs of dawn, believing with every fiber of our being that we had, for now, been granted a temporary reprieve. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, too terrified to move, too afraid to even whisper. The minutes crept by, agonizingly slow. I kept my eyes fixed on the empty space where the red eyes had been, half expecting them to reappear. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every gust of wind felt like a heavy step. But the forest held its breath, just like us. We waited, suspended in a state of suspended terror, just waiting for the first signs of dawn, believing with every fiber of our being that we had, for now, been granted a temporary reprieve. My body was stiff when the first hint of light touched the tent fabric. It wasn't really light, not yet. More like the absence of absolute black, a soft gray pushing against the darkness. It was enough, though. Enough to see the faint outlines of James and Brian next to me, enough to know the night was finally giving way. We scrambled out of our sleeping bags almost at the same instant. There was no discussion, no shared glance even, just a mutual, unspoken need to get out of there, right then, before something else happened. My hands moved on autopilot, fumbling with the tent poles, yanking at stakes. Every rustle of leaves outside, every snap of a distant twig made me jump. My nerves were frayed, pulled tight, like violin strings ready to break. James was already struggling with his tent, muttering under his breath. Brian, usually the slowest one to pack up, was moving with a frantic energy I'd never seen from him. He shoved his sleeping bag into its sack without bothering to roll it. Our movements were jerky, clumsy, driven by the sheer terror that had steeped into our bones. We kept our eyes glued to the tree line, scanning the places where the red eyes had disappeared. Even with the growing light, the woods looked ominous, a wall of dark, quiet menace. "Did you take down yours yet?" Brian asked, his voice strained, not actually looking at me. He was wrestling with a guy line that had somehow gotten tangled around a small pine. I shook my head, already yanking at the stakes of my own tent. Almost just this side. My fingers felt numb, clumsy. The cold seeped into my hands, probably from the damp ground, but it felt like the cold of fear. As I pulled the last stake free, I noticed something on a nearby oak tree. Deep grooves scored into the bark. They weren't natural, not from a bear scratching an itch or a deer rubbing antlers. These were too clean, too precise, cutting into the wood like something incredibly sharp had dragged over it. They were long, maybe 5 or 6 inches, curving slightly upward. And there were 3 distinct marks, close together, like a very large claw had raked down the trunk. I stopped, just staring at them for a second. That thing had been asterisk right here, not just circling us, but leaning against the trees, maybe watching us through the flimsy tent fabric. My stomach clenched, feeling a fresh wave of unease. It wasn't just observing, it was practically touching our camp. "Hey," I said, my voice quiet, pointing to the tree. "Look at this." James stopped packing his tent and looked over. His eyes landed on the claw marks, and his face went a little paler, if that was even possible. Brian came over too, following our gaze. He didn't say anything, just stared at the marks with wide eyes. The air felt thick with what we weren't saying. The claw marks were proof, undeniable evidence that whatever had been out there was real, and it was close. Too close. We started moving again, faster this time, like seeing the marks was a physical push to hurry. I folded my tent haphazardly, not caring if it was neat. The important thing was getting it into the car. James was already pulling at the straps of his backpack, practically throwing items into it. As I gathered up the last of my things near the fire pit, my gaze went to the spot where James had thrown the firewood. He de-chucked it toward the creature right before it cried out, and it had landed with that sickening thud. The ground there was messed up, the leaves and dirt kicked away. It was a small patch, maybe 2 feet across, where the earth looked churned up. And in the middle of it, clear as day, were impressions in the soil. They were big, really big. Not a paw print, not a paw print at all. These were foot impressions, and they were 3-toed. Just like the claw marks, they seemed to be 3 very large, distinct indentations, pressed deep into the damp earth. The heel of the print was wide, suggesting something substantial, something incredibly heavy. The impressions weren't haphazard either. They were distinct, almost like a giant 3-toed bird had landed there, or something worse. The depth of the prints showed it had to weigh a ton, and the way they were arranged, in a slight forward inclination, showed it was standing on 2 legs, a bipedal creature. My breath hitched. The images in my head, the ones I had pushed away as impossible, came back with a vengeance. Something massive, standing on 2 feet, with 3-toed feet and razor-sharp claws. The red eyes flashed in my mind. This wasn't some lost animal. This was something out of a nightmare, something that defied everything I knew about the natural world. "James," I managed to say, my voice still a little shaky. "Look here." He came over, and his eyes dropped to the disturbed earth. His jaw worked for a second, then he let out a low sound, a soft inhale that was half gasp, half groan. "Oh man," he whispered, "look at those. 3 toes." Brian shuffled over, his eyes following James's. He saw the impressions and just stood there, looking down, his shoulders hunched. Nobody said anything else about the prints. There wasn't anything to say. They were proof, just like the claw marks. Proof of something that shouldn't exist, something that had nearly gotten us. Suddenly, James crouched down near a thorny bush at the very edge of where our camp ended. It was right where the creature had cried out after he'd thrown the wood, near the path it had used to run away. He was poking at something with a trembling finger. "Look at this," he said, holding up a single strand of something. It was long, thick, and very black. It looked almost like a piece of wire at first glance, incredibly coarse and dense. It was caught on one of the bush's thorns. It must have scraped it off when it ran. I took a step closer. The hair, if that's what it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was maybe 6 inches long, very thick, and had an almost metallic sheen to it. It didn't look like animal fur, not really. It looked engineered, like something that belonged in a lab, not pulled from a living thing in the forest. It was unnervingly black, absorbing all light, not just dark brown. An odd instinct took hold of me, a feeling that this wasn't just a weird souvenir. This single, strange strand was important, maybe the key to understanding what the hell we had just gone through. I reached into the side pocket of my backpack, where I always kept a few small plastic baggies for trash or anything else I might need to keep separate. I pulled one out and carefully, very carefully, took the hair from James. I folded it gently, not wanting to damage it, and sealed the baggie. He gave me a strange look, like he didn't understand why I was bothering, but he didn't question it. We finished packing in a blur, working with a relentless, unspoken agreement. Every zipper, every buckle, every item tossed into the back of my old car felt like a desperate act of self-preservation. We didn't care that the tents were rolled up sloppy, or that our gear was just piled in. All that mattered was getting it into the trunk, getting it into the passenger seat, just getting it into the car. The only thing we cared about was getting away from the forest, getting away from the lingering sensation of dread that still clung to the trees like a damp fog. The thought of those inhuman eyes, the 3-toed prints, the impossible cry of pain, it hammered at me. A constant, sharp reminder that we had barely escaped something truly terrible. I slammed the trunk shut, the sound echoing a little too loud in the morning quiet. James and Brian were already in the car, buckled in, their faces tight. I got behind the wheel, the cold plastic of the steering wheel feeling odd under my hands. The car started with a familiar grumble, and I put it in reverse, not even looking in the rearview mirror. I just wanted to leave that place behind, the faster the better. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. Usually our car rides were filled with chatter, bad jokes, and music turned up loud. But today, the silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the tires on the asphalt. James kept his gaze fixed out the window, his jaw set. Brian was slumped in the back seat, staring at his knees. We didn't talk about the red eyes, the claw marks, or the 3-toed prints. We didn't talk about the strange, black hair in the plastic baggie that was now tucked deep into my backpack. It was like acknowledging any of it would make it more real, more terrifying. We just drove, heading east on the highway, away from the deep woods and whatever was lurking in them. My hands felt locked on the wheel. Every few minutes, I'd check the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something huge and dark running behind us, those red eyes burning in the distance. It was ridiculous, I knew, but the fear was still there, a cold knot in my gut, twisting with every mile marker we passed. The sun was getting higher, starting to burn off the morning mist, and the light felt like a shield, pushing back against the lingering shadows in my mind. We finally pulled into my driveway in Lexington, Kentucky, a little over an hour later. The familiar suburban street, with its neat lawns and quiet houses, offered little comfort. My house, usually a place of easy relaxation, felt like a temporary shelter, not a true safe zone. It was just an escape, for now, from the woods. James was the first to move. He got out of the car, stretched his stiff back, and then turned to us, his eyes serious. "We need to do something with that hair," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if someone might overhear us. "We can't just keep it." Brian pulled himself out of the backseat, looking tired. "What are we supposed to do with it, James? Show it to our parents? Call the police? They'll just tell us we saw a bear or something." He sounded defeated, like he was already giving up. "No, not them," James said, shaking his head. He looked straight at me. "A university, a biology department. They have the equipment. They can tell us what it is, or what it isn't." I actually liked the idea. It felt like an actual step we could take, something proactive after a night of just reacting, just running. "He's right," I said, looking at Brian. "It's the only way we'll know. Otherwise, we just spent the night getting terrorized by what? A really big raccoon." Brian didn't look convinced. He kicked at a loose stone on my driveway. "They're gonna laugh at us, man." 3 guys fresh from a camping trip, handing over a hair sample, talking about red eyes and 3-toed prints. We'll be the weirdos from the woods who saw Bigfoot. He wrapped his arms around himself like he was cold, even though the morning was turning warm. "So what if they do?" James countered, his voice getting a little louder. "Did you feel like you were running from a bear last night, Brian? Did that thing sound like any animal you've ever heard?" Brian went quiet, and I saw his shoulders slump a little more. He didn't have an answer for that. None of us did. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "We need to know. For our own sanity, if nothing else. We can't just pretend it didn't happen. What if it's still out there? What if it comes back?" That seemed to get through to Brian. He looked up, his eyes a little wider. The possibility of it coming back settled over us like another damp fog. He finally gave a small nod. "Okay, fine. But if they laugh, you guys are buying me dinner for a month." "Deal," James said quickly, a hint of something like relief in his voice. The next question was which department to go to. "Biology, right?" I asked, already pulling out my phone. "That makes the most sense. They deal with identifying organisms and stuff." "Yeah, biology," James agreed, looking over my shoulder as I typed University of Kentucky Biology Department into my search bar. I found the address and a campus map. The thought of walking onto a university campus like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just survived something impossible, felt surreal. But at the same time, this practical step grounded us a little. It was something tangible we could do. "All right, let's go," I said, putting the car in gear again. The drive to the University of Kentucky campus was short. We found the biology building, a solid brick structure nestled among older, ivy-covered buildings. It looked official, serious. That made me feel a little better, like we were trusting this bizarre thing to people who were used to dealing with weird stuff. We walked inside, the hushed quiet of the hallways, a stark contrast to the echoing silence of the forest. We found the department office and explained hesitantly that we had something we needed identified. The administrative assistant, a woman with kind but tired eyes, pointed us toward a large, slightly cluttered office down the hall. Dr. Clark. She's a graduate student, but she's really good with unusual samples. We knocked on the door, and a voice called out, "Come in." Dr. Emily Clark looked up from a microscope. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with bright, curious eyes and a mess of dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her desk was covered in notebooks, beakers, and what looked like a half-eaten sandwich. She pushed her safety glasses up onto her forehead. "Can I help you guys?" she asked, a small smile on her face. Her voice was friendly, but I could tell she was busy. I took a deep breath. This was the moment. "Hi, Dr. Clark," I started. "My friends and I, we were camping, and we found this. We were hoping you could take a look at it." I pulled the plastic baggie from my backpack, carefully taking out the strange black hair. I laid it on her desk. She leaned closer, her smile fading a little as she picked up the baggie, holding it carefully. Her eyes, which had been friendly a moment before, now narrowed slightly, studying the unusual texture and unnervingly dark color of the strand. She murmured, turning it over in the plastic. "That's interesting." She didn't laugh. She didn't look at us like we were crazy. Her curiosity seemed genuine. "It's from something we can't identify," James added, his voice a little shaky. "We think it's hair, but it's really coarse." Brian just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her face for any sign of ridicule. Dr. Clark walked over to another desk covered in equipment. She held the baggie up to a light, looking at the hair from different angles. "It does look like hair structurally," she said, almost to herself. "But the density and the color, it's unusually dark." She paused, her brow furrowed in thought. "I've never seen anything quite like it. Where exactly did you say you found this?" "In the woods," I said vaguely. "Near our campsite. It belonged to something really big. We think it got scraped off a thorny bush." She nodded slowly, as if processing this. "Okay," she said, turning back to us. "I can try to analyze it. It might take a few days. We can try to get a DNA sequence, run some comparisons. But I can't promise anything. This isn't exactly standard." She gave us a slight, almost imperceptible smirk, probably thinking we were just a bunch of overly imaginative campers. But there was a spark of interest in her eyes, a genuine scientific curiosity that seemed to push past any skepticism. "That's all we're asking for," I said, feeling a small wave of relief wash over me. Is it?" "All right," she said, giving us a more reassuring smile. "I'll do my best. Can I get a name and number where I can reach you?" I gave her my name, Daniel Torres, and my phone number. She jotted it down in a small notebook, still glancing at the baggie containing the hair. "We really appreciate this, Dr. Clark," James said. "No problem," she replied, picking up the baggie again, her gaze already lost in thought as she examined the mysterious strand. "This actually looks like a good challenge." We thanked her again and left her office, the door clicking shut behind us. Walking out of the biology building, the campus seemed a little brighter, the air a little lighter. We still felt shaken, no doubt, but there was a faint sense of calm that had settled over us. We had taken a step. We had done something real to understand the impossible thing we had encountered. The hair was out of our hands, and now, maybe, we could finally get some answers. A week later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting a text from James about something pointless, or maybe Brian trying to convince me to go grab food somewhere. Instead, the screen showed a number I didn't recognize. It was probably just some telemarketer. I almost ignored it. But then a thought clicked. The University of Kentucky asterisk. My stomach did a little flip. I swiped to answer. "Hello, Daniel Tors," a voice asked. It was Dr. Clark. I recognized it immediately, though it sounded different than it had in her office that day. Her usual friendly tone was gone, replaced by something heavier, more serious. "Yeah, this is Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My gaze went to my backpack, sitting slumped in the corner of my room. The memory of the strange black hair in the plastic baggie, of the three-toed prints, of those glowing red eyes, slammed into me. This was it, an answer. Or maybe more questions. "This is Dr. Clark from the biology department," she went on, her voice losing even more of its initial politeness, becoming purely professional, almost clinical. "I have the results from that sample you brought in last week." I felt my jaw tighten. "Okay," I managed to say. "What did you find?" There was a short pause on her end, and I could hear some faint rustling, like she was adjusting something at her desk. The silence stretched, and every second felt like a drumbeat in my ears. I could practically feel the weight of her next words before she even spoke them. "Mr. Tors," she finally said, and her voice sounded carefully controlled, like she was picking each word with extreme caution. "The results are significant, and frankly, quite perplexing." My mind raced. Perplexing? What did that even mean? Was it a joke? Had they found something silly that would make us feel dumb for even bringing it in? But her tone wasn't playful. It was all business, deadly serious. "What is it?" I asked, my voice a little rougher than I intended. I was picturing the hair, that unnervingly black strand that didn't seem to belong anywhere. "Well," she began, and I could tell she was choosing her words with extreme care, like she was briefing someone important on a very delicate matter. "To put it simply, the hair sample you provided is unidentifiable. We've run it through our entire database, cross-referenced it with every known species, both extant and extinct." She paused again, giving each word time to sink in. "And it matches nothing. Absolutely nothing on Earth." My blood ran cold. "Nothing on Earth." The words echoed in my head, loud and clear. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't any animal from any zoo or history book. It was something completely, terrifyingly unknown. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. Are you serious?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I knew she was serious. I could hear it. But a part of me, the part that still clung to the normal, rational world, wanted to deny it. "Completely serious, Mr. Tors," she replied, and there was no hint of amusement or doubt in her tone. "In fact, it gets even more unusual. We managed to extract a genetic marker, but it's unlike anything we've ever observed. A completely novel sequence. It doesn't align with any known biological classification, not even remotely. A novel sequence that made the hair even more alien, more impossible. It wasn't just a weird animal, it was something that didn't fit into any of the established rules of life. The glowing red eyes, the three-toed prints, the unnatural cry, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't some lost animal. It truly was something from a nightmare. It wasn't just unknown. It was asterisk, unknowable asterisk, at least by our current understanding of biology. Beyond that, Dr. Clark continued, and I could hear a subtle shift in her voice, a slight lift in pitch that suggested a spark of genuine scientific excitement. We analyzed the cellular structure of the hair. It's incredibly dense, much denser than typical mammalian or even reptilian hair, and it appears to be structured in a way that suggests extremely high durability. It could withstand extreme temperatures without degrading. We tested it with controlled heat, and it showed remarkable resistance. It's almost designed for resilience. Durable, heat-resistant. That was a lot to take in. It suggested a creature that could survive intense conditions, perhaps in environments we couldn't even imagine. It wasn't just a random oddity. It was built for something. I was barely processing it all. So, what does that mean? I asked, my voice still shaky. What could it mean, really? It means, she said, and her tone turned more direct, that we need more information. This isn't just a curiosity. This is a potential discovery of immense scientific importance. Her initial skepticism, the slight smirk she'd given us in her office, was completely gone. Now it was replaced by pure, unadulterated scientific curiosity, a blazing intensity in her voice. Mr. Torres, I need you and your friends to come back to the lab. We need to go over every single detail of that night. Every observation, every sound, every movement. Anything you remember could be crucial. She needed asterisk us asterisk. She needed asterisk our asterisk story. My mind flashed back to Brian's doubt, to the idea that they'd laugh at us. No one was laughing now. Dr. Clark wanted to know more. She believed us, or at least she believed the evidence. This creature was no hoax. It was real, and it was something truly unknown. Yes, I said immediately, without any hesitation. We can come in. Just tell us when. How about tomorrow morning? She suggested, her voice brisk and eager now. Say 10 a.m., my office. 10 a.m., I confirmed. We'll be there. Excellent, she said. And Mr. Torres, please don't share this information with anyone beyond your friends. Not yet. Until we have more data, this needs to remain confidential. Understood, I said. We'll see you tomorrow. I hung up the phone, my hand still gripping it tight. It wasn't just a weird camping story anymore. It was real. The thing in the woods, with its glowing red eyes and three-toed feet, existed, and its hair was from nowhere known to science. The silence in my room suddenly felt heavy, charged with the inexplicable. I had to call James and Brian. I dialed James first. He picked up on the second ring, sounding a little annoyed. Hey, what's up? It's Daniel, I said, cutting straight to the point. Dr. Clark called about the hair. There was a slight shift in his breathing on the other end of the line, and his voice was low, careful. "It's not from any animal on Earth, James," I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. She said it's unidentifiable. It's got a genetic marker no one's ever seen, and the cells are super dense, really durable, heat-resistant. Silence. A heavier, more profound silence than the one in my room. I could almost hear him processing it, his mind racing through the implications. Then a soft, shaky exhale. "No way," he finally whispered. "Seriously, like alien." She didn't use that word, I clarified. "But yeah, it's not from here. She wants us to come back to the lab, go over everything we remember." "Okay," he said, his voice stronger now, laced with a strange mix of dread and a hint of something else. A pull, a scientific curiosity, maybe, similar to Dr. Clark's. "Hey, I'm in. Call Brian. We need to talk." I hung up with James and immediately called Brian. His reaction was a little different. "What do you mean unidentifiable?" he asked, his voice high-pitched with disbelief. "Are you messing with me?" "No, dude, I'm not," I said, patiently explaining what Dr. Clark had told me, repeating the details about the genetic marker and the hair's durability. So what was it then?" Brian said, the fear clear in his voice now. "What the hell did we see?" "That's what she wants to figure out," I told him. "She wants us to come back to the lab tomorrow, tell her everything else we remember." There was a long pause on his end. I could almost picture him rubbing his hand over his face, like he always did when he was stressed. "I don't know, man," he finally said. "This is a lot. I just wanted to forget about it." "I know," I said, "but we can't, can we? Not after this." "Tell me what time," he conceded, his voice resigned. "I guess we have to, for our own sanity, right?" 10 a.m. her office, I confirmed. "We'll all meet there, make sure we go in together." "All right," he said, his voice still sounding a little shaky. "See you then." I put my phone down and just sat there for a minute, staring at the wall. The news was unsettling, but also validating. We weren't crazy. We hadn't imagined it. The thing that came to our camp, the creature that cried out with that impossible sound, it was real. And it was unknown. The next morning, we met at my house, getting into my car for the short drive to the university. The morning was chilly, the sky a dull gray. The atmosphere in the car was heavier than it had been on the drive home from the campsite. Before, there had been a vague, unsettling fear, a quiet dread that something terrible had almost happened. Now, it was a heavy, certain truth. It wasn't just a memory, it was a confirmed reality. James sat in the passenger seat, quieter than usual, his face set in thought. Brian was in the back, picking at a loose thread on his jeans, avoiding eye contact. The easy silence of our usual drives was gone, replaced by a tense quiet that hummed with unspoken questions. What was it? Where did it come from? And what did it want? We parked in the university lot. The walk to the biology building felt different this time. It wasn't just a trip to confirm our fears. It was a journey into the unknown. We hadn't realized how much we had secretly hoped that Dr. Clark would tell us it was a known animal, something explainable, something that could be categorized and understood. But she hadn't. We reached the building, and the familiar brick facade seemed less imposing than it had before, simply because our internal dread, overshadowed any external appearance. The quiet hallways still felt hushed, but now they seemed to hold a different kind of silence, a weight of potential discovery. We walked into the office, and Dr. Clark looked up from her desk, her bright, curious eyes meeting ours. Her expression was solemn, confirming everything she had said on the phone. This was no prank. This was no misunderstanding. She gestured for us to sit in the chairs opposite her desk. "Thank you for coming back," she said, her voice serious. She didn't offer a smile or any small talk. "I've been thinking about this intensely since I spoke with you." She paused, her gaze settling on each of us for a moment, like she was gauging our composure. "This isn't an isolated incident, I don't think. There have been other reports over the years, similar accounts of unusual activity in remote areas, things that were usually dismissed as folklore or misidentification. But with this," she tapped the plastic baggie with the hair, which was still sitting on her desk, "this changes everything." I saw James nod slowly, a slight wrinkle forming on his forehead. Brian, still looking a little shell-shocked, just stared at the baggie. "We need to be systematic about this," Dr. Clark continued, her voice gaining a slight edge of determination. "I need to hear every single detail you can recall from that night. The sequence of events, sounds, smells, any changes in the environment you noticed, even things that might seem minor." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "This could be very important for science, potentially for humanity." The weight of her words settled over us. For humanity asterisk. It felt like she was talking about something out of a science fiction movie, not something that had happened to us during a camping trip in the middle of nowhere. But the hair was proof. The raw, unsettling reality of what we had encountered was now tangible. "We can start from the beginning," I said, clearing my throat, trying to recall every moment with perfect clarity. It was just after dark when we first heard it, and so we began to tell the story of that night, recounting every terrifying moment, every strange sound, every detail we could remember, all to Dr. Clark. The conversation went on for what felt like hours, reliving the fear, the confusion, and the impossible reality of the creature in the woods. When we finished, the early afternoon sun was beginning to stream into her office, but the shadows in our minds were still long. Dr. Clark listened patiently, taking detailed notes, only interrupting to ask for clarification on small points. Her focused attention made the improbable events of that night feel even more real, more valid. It wasn't just a crazy story we were telling, it was data. "This is incredibly helpful," she said, finally closing her notebook. She leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Based on what you've described, the bipedal gait, the incredible force, the vocalizations, combined with the properties of the hair, this creature represents a significant anomaly. I would even go as far as to say it's unparalleled in our understanding of life." She looked at us, her gaze firm. "What happened to you was not a natural event." We just sat there, allowing her words to sink in, trying to process the implications. Not natural, unparalleled. It was true then. It was definitely true. We had survived wasn't just a scare. It was an encounter with something that science couldn't explain. "So, what now?" James asked, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, betraying the uncertainty we all felt. Dr. Clark paused, looking from James to Brian, then to me. Her expression was serious, thoughtful. "Now," she said, "we have a choice. We can let this go, pretend it didn't happen, dismiss it as an isolated, unexplainable event. Or we can investigate further." She picked up the plastic baggie again, holding it up, the black hair a stark contrast against the clear plastic. "This is just one sample, one encounter. But what if it's not? What if there's more out there? What if this creature, whatever it is, poses a threat or offers a breakthrough?" She put the baggie down, her eyes meeting ours. "I'm willing to dedicate my time and resources to this, but I'll need your continued help, your recollections, your insights, and if necessary, your willingness to explore the possibility further." She watched our faces, waiting for a response. I thought about the burning red eyes, the scraping claws, the deep three-toed prints, the feeling of being hunted, of being utterly vulnerable to something that defied all logic. My gut tightened. Part of me just wanted to run, to bury it all, to pretend it never happened. But the other part, the part that had clutched that baggie of hair in the immediate aftermath, knew that wasn't an option. Not anymore. This was real, and we couldn't ignore it. It still haunted my thoughts, a dark, lingering question mark in my mind. The woods would never feel the same again, and neither would sleep. James was the first to speak. "I'm in," he said, his voice determined. "I need to know." Brian hesitated, running a hand through his hair. He looked tired again, but his expression was firm. "Me too, I guess," he mumbled, a resigned sigh escaping him. This thing," he looked at the black hair. "It's not going to just disappear from our heads, is it?" I knew he was right. It wouldn't. This thing had become a part of us, a terrifying secret we carried. There was no going back to how things were. I looked at Dr. Clark. "We're with you," I said, trying to sound as confident as I felt. There was a faint, almost invisible nod from her. We had decided we were going to figure this out, whatever this was.